Hi, and welcome to Talkward. I'm Marty Dundix, editor-in-chief of Weekly Humorous Magazine, and this is Talkward, a fun little podcast where professionally funny people come to tell awkward and cringeworthy stories. I'm very excited about today's guest. He is a repeat Talkward guest. He was one of our possibly first. He wasn't our first. He wasn't our second. He might have been our third. I got to go back in the archives. We got to see what number he was on Talkward. But he is back and better than ever with a book to boot. We're going to talk all about it. I'm very excited to have Tom McCaffrey here today. Welcome, Tom, and thank you for coming on Talkward. And congratulations on this brand new awesome book. It's called Born Funny. And
Thank you.
It's a comedics chronicle through the rise of alt comedy. So welcome back to Talkward, Tom McCaffrey, everybody. And
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. Oh, that feels so good. It feels so real.
It's like being on a small, terrible stage in a basement in the Lower East Side.
Right,
and then you
take it.
And you hear some of that, and then you get brought back to the world of stand-up.
Yeah, that feels
memories.
more. That feels better. More like it.
The memories.
The second one.
This is so exciting. Thank you for coming back on. It's been a couple of years, and thank you for sending me this book. I tore through it. I got to almost the end.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, that's good.
But that's only because I started it yesterday, because I'm a bad person with deadlines, and I was like, oh, I got to read this book. And I read in one sitting, Tom.
Really?
I read almost this entire book, and this book is not a tiny book. This book is almost 400 pages. This book is 400 pages.
Yeah, it's I'm kind of amazed by that sometimes because I have a hard time reading books. So writing one is just, I don't know how I did that, but I'm also surprised at people that have read it, because people will contact me and say they read it, and I'm like, really?
You read this whole book? Amazing.
Well, I just feel like no one really, reads, right? I mean, isn't that kind of like where our society is? I appreciate you reading it.
The tough thing about reading books is it does require attention that people do not seem to give anymore. 100% attention. More attention than it takes to drive a car, it takes to read a book.
That's true.
When you're driving, you're kind of like, you're everywhere. You're doing all kinds of stuff when you're driving. But you can't do that when you're reading.
I've been driving sometimes and then just forgotten that I was driving. I'm like, oh yeah, wait, I think I'm driving now. So
there's a word for that, where you forget the last like half hour, and it's like highway hypnosis or something like that, where you're just on autopilot.
Yeah, that sounds safe.
You really can't be on autopilot when you're reading a book, though, because you are in to this story, and the story of this book, this character, Steve Collin, is, surprise everybody, it's Tom McCaffrey in disguise. I don't want to ruin it.
But
the whole time I'm reading this book, I'm just picturing you in every single thing that happens to Steve. I'm just seeing Tom, and he just keeps on. He kind of gets beat down over and over again. This book is about your career in stand-up comedy, told through a heightened novelization of storytelling, which I think is a really good way to do it, because some of these memoirs are clunky and they're kind of weird or they're unbelievable, but the way that you were able to weave a story around your true life, a little bit of things here and there to add little pizzazz to make it entertaining. But I mean, it's an easy read, and it's fun. It's definitely a fun book to get into, especially, I'm 44. I've been in New York City for 20 years working in comedy. So
Could you relate to some of this stuff?
I mean, I think I was waiting to see a fictionalized version of a jerky me, just kind of sitting in the corner, being a jerk or something, because I could picture that the night at Rafifi that I can remember many times being there.
Well, what page are you on?
Am I? I was actually kind of worried about that. I was
You're
like,
in
wait,
the last.
am
You're in
I?
the last 30 pages.
The last part that I didn't read is like, Marty, I thought we were going to talk about how much I shit on you in this book, but you didn't
Yeah,
even get to
yeah.
that.
I introduced a guy named Schmarty, so it's not you. Um, and it is me, but it is a slightly fictionalized. I guess I got the idea from like Charles Bukowski, where he would write under the surname Henry Chinaski was the name of the but it was clearly him, but you could kind of tell he was taking some liberties because there is stuff that didn't happen. I trumped up some stuff kind of to be comedic for like humorous effect, almost like I was the Forrest Gump of comedy, kind of affecting
You did.
huge moments of comedy,
It
pivotal
was it
moments.
was very fun to find those little moments that you did weave through. There are bold-faced names in the book that are character that are themselves the people that you interacted with on your way up in the career path, who were just starting out, and it's fun to see how they were, sprinkled in, and it
And
kind
how
of
I
gave
shaped their careers.
how they owe you everything, but you get no thank you, Tom. No one's patting you on the back.
I know. I'm
And
used to
so
it.
I can tell. I know you're used to it. It's so funny because, you the way that the character describes himself being detached and nonchalant, you are so detached and nonchalant of a person, yet you look at the bio and you look at the credits and all of the things you've accomplished, and it's remarkable,
Well,
Tom.
you're kind of my. Are you considered Gen X?
I'm a cusper, so I think I'm kind of an in between. I was born in 1978. I'm still analog. So I kind of put all of us analog people together because we had that shared experience of growing up and sort of being like latchkey kids where we could just leave for a
Yeah.
while, and then we would come back when the streetlights came on. Is when we had to go home, and it wasn't a big question on where we were or who we were with, as long as we were sort of always in the same zone of friends' basements within the neighborhood, riding bikes. We weren't really
Right.
going anywhere.
Yeah, but I mentioned in the book that I am a Gen Xer, and that was before Gen X was even a thing, like a term that existed. Um, the Gen X attitude, kind of the way I grew up, or my generation grew up, was we were very detached and aloof, which was kind of our defense mechanism. It was kind
Oh
of
yeah,
you
very Bill
couldn't.
Murray. I could definitely relate to everything that you were talking about with comedy heroes and the attitude of
I
I
don't
don't I don't
care.
care. I don't
Because
you
it's like
can't.
you're not you do care, but it's also kind of like the Gen X was also kind of, because I'm the youngest in my family, and there is a little bit of like Gen X always was the discarded younger sibling who wasn't really getting the attention, and the defense to that was, well, I don't really care, I don't really need attention. I guess so. It was kind of like it wasn't cool to really talk up yourself, or really we would brag and stuff, but it was just kind of like the attitude of it was like Nirvana. Yeah, we know, like Nirvana was like, yeah, we're really famous and successful, but who cares? We don't we're not about money. A big thing in our generation too, I think, was like selling out was a huge deal. You remember that? I remember when like Reality Bites came out, and that was like
Yeah.
a big, that was like the Gen X movie. It was very like selling out was this the cardinal sin of our
Yeah.
generation. You couldn't be obsessed with materialism and commercialism and caring about what people thought of you. So, but you did, we did.
Yeah, people had to make money. It's always so funny because it was like, "What are you selling out?" And it's like, "Yeah, because I can't afford food." And then as you get older and you realize bills and you realize all this crap that does pile up, you're like, "God, I need to start an Etsy shop or something." I don't know what people expect of me, but you got to do something,
Yeah, and I think now I don't even know what selling out looks like now. I don't even, because
right?
now it's kind of the opposite. It's almost like it's almost a badge of honor, and almost like shows it's almost illustrative of you being successful when you
Right.
will have sponsors on your show. You know what I mean? It's almost like if you don't have a sponsor or don't have a commercial, it's kind of like you're not legitimate. So I don't even know which I think is a good thing. I don't, but it's also weird. I don't know if you've experienced where with the whole social media age now and stuff and like promoting yourself. I had a hard time adjusting to that because deep down, in my marrow, I just was not, that's not how my brain operated. It just
And a quick
wasn't.
break for a word from our sponsor, coffee. Coffee. It's the only reason I get up in the morning. Back to the show with Tom.
I'm glad someone's getting the word out about coffee finally.
So you started. I mean, it's fun to read. To read this book is fun on two levels. It's an entertaining story, but also I know you. But now I know you a lot more because I've read intimate parts of your life now. I mean, this is a very intimate portrait of a man who is you, a fictionalized version of you. But you can tell that the majority of the storyline is your life. So, I mean, you've had such an interesting life, Tom. I mean, growing up in New York City, amazing, right? In the East Village area.
Yeah, so kind of around Gramercy Park, yeah.
Amazing. And then you go to the Fame High School.
Right.
And you're like an actor guy. You're going through all this actor guy stuff. And then you have drama. Because you're an actor guy, drama stuff happens to you. And then you go to Los Angeles.
Eventually, yes, yeah.
But you don't go to Los Angeles right away. What happens from actor school, not getting the showcase? Wow. I feel like I just lived your entire life in this book, which is crazy to get to talk to you about it now, because it's like, and how does that feel being an author? This is your first book. How does it feel putting intimate details of your life out there on the printed page for people to buy and read and consume privately, and they're reading you?
It's weird. It's definitely, I think when I was writing it and, going through the publishing process, I had moments of, I guess this is going to be out there and people are going to read it. But I think it took so long kind of, from the, when it went the beginning of the publishing process to when it actually was published, that I started to forget what I had even put in there. So I do have moments every now and then where I'm just like having a realization, like someone will be like, "Oh, I read the book," and I'm like, "Oh, fuck! Like, what did I say?" Because that's kind of why I wanted to make it me, but not me. It's why I changed mine. That the name is different, and I did change some things here and there, but because that made it again, it was kind of a little bit made it separate from it and detached from it. So I think it's again partly it's like the Gen X in me, where it's like, well, it's not really cool to just like write a book laying everything out there that's me specifically. It's kind of like I can still hide under the guise of like, well, it's not really me.
Right.
I mean, it is, because someone did point out to me, Mike Kaplan, I was talking to, because he read it and he was like, it's your name, it's not you, but I noticed that the character puts out an album with the exact same name as your album, and I was like, oh yeah, that's true. Like that's a pretty specific detail that I didn't change. So I don't know. It's
because
weird.
You want people to go and get the album. You can't go put a fake name of a fake album. It's like, well, I'm not really doing myself any help promoting a fake album in this book.
I know. I probably should change it to something like, the album was called Wilson Phillips in the book, but Lou Diamond Phillips was I think I just put it in there and just forgot. But it's weird. I just forget what's in there, and it is weird. But like I said, I think I just assumed no one would really read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know how it is. Even just not a book, but something you put out there. You're like, well, no one's really going to see this or listen to this.
You're like, Marty's only going to read the summary on the back before he asks me about this book. He's not going to read the whole book. Look at this guy. He's obviously a slacker. And you're right. But for this one, I read it.
It is weird. And the people who are reading it is surprising me. It's
is it mostly comedy people? Is it like a lot of comedy people? I'm sure would be just
comedy people, a lot of people that I didn't.
Well,
people that I knew kind of at that time, like obviously, I guess they'd be more invested in it because they were also there, and I feel like it's one of those things. It's been long enough since that happened that you can look back on it with a certain nostalgia, where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was like kind of that was a fun, interesting time. But then I also talk about the struggles of it and how hard it was, like when you're really, and I think that was a big part of what I wanted to get in there was like the comedy at first when you start doing it, it seems like, oh, I'm following my dream and this is fun. It's like we're all like funny people and it's comedy, but comedy really is a grind, and it can really take a toll on you, and it's tough, and a
So
lot
much
goes into
drama.
it.
Comedy is so much drama. It's such a emotional, and like you said in the book, comedians, they just constantly are just yearning for this approval on a nightly basis. Every set, it has to be the best set you ever, it's like you have to do it over and over again to keep doing it.
That's what's really hard.
And
Just
it
it
seems
never
a
ends.
bit insane because as a non-comic who was going to these shows, I came to New York in 2002 and I had a job. I was an art major in college. I was an illustrator, humor illustrator for newspapers. I was working for the New York Press and my day job was working at Letterman. And I met
Really?
everybody. Yeah, so I met all
Oh,
the
cool.
people at Letterman. I worked in the audience department, so I was working with all the people that we're checking in the audience, we're chatting with people, we're giving out tickets. It's like it's
Were
like a
you a
part time.
page ever?
I worked next to the pages, so I was a recruiter. So I worked next to the pages. Yeah, I made like $2 more an hour. Not to brag or anything, Tom, but I didn't get to wear the cool little jacket. But I had a little lanyard and a clipboard, and but I worked with like Kevin McCaffrey and Jamie and all those folks, and that's how I met Kevin and
Ah,
a lot of comedy people. Ben Schwartz was there as a page when I was there, so he was just starting to do the UCB stuff,
wow.
and so it was kind of like when
Whatever
you're in.
happened to him?
I haven't heard. I think he burned out pretty fast. I think he
Yeah,
burned out
yeah.
pretty fast. So it's fun kind of being in the world because people come and go and you see people rise and fall and it's incredible, right? And you were this active participant in this movement as it was happening, which was a tangible thing, this comedy of the aughts where
Right, right.
there's all these, there's the main clubs, there's Dangerfields and then there's Caroline's and then there's Gotham and then you
Comic
have
strip and
yeah, Boston Comedy Club, right? Boston Comedy
right,
Club.
yeah, I remember that.
Comic Strip was over at the no, not the comic. What am I thinking of that closed? It was in Meatpacking.
Comics?
Comics with an X. Yes.
Yeah, and that was an interesting one because that was sort of opened in the late aughts, and their template, their vision of it was to be sort of like a corporatized alt scene club. So it was kind of going to be like a Caroline, like a big kind of
It was
club.
too. It was gorgeous. And
It
it
was nice.
burned. It just closed down so fast.
Well, it was around for a little bit, and I did perform there a decent amount towards the. I actually, it's interesting. I think I'm the last person to have ever performed on that stage.
That was a great area. I remember going to a big show there. I think with Kevin. I think Kevin McCaffrey was on that show. I went to that show. Then we all went to Coyote Ugly, or the bar next to Coyote Ugly. That was the real Coyote Ugly.
Oh, Hogs and Heifers.
Hogs and Heifers. We ended up at Hogs and Heifers, and that was a wild time. That was after this. There was a big show. It was like a big, huge thing at comics that night, and everybody went to Hogs and Heifers, and that was a crazy, crazy. And then I woke up on the N, coming back from Queens at like 8 a.m. It was all
Yeah.
commuters, and I woke up and I was like wearing my like a nice outfit from last night. And I was like, off to work.
You're wearing a Letterman page outfit.
Everything's
You're like-
fine.
You're like, holy shit.
Gotta go in.
No, I feel like the aughts were just kind of just a bunch of stories like that, right? And then I just woke up on the street, and you're like, oh,
yeah. And everything was fine. I just went home, and there was no long-term damage, so everybody was fine.
right.
So you started doing comedy, pretty. I mean, you started quick when you were in the station wagon as a child. You told your jokes, and then after high school, you did stand-up comedy in New York for the first time.
I did, yeah. So what I think it's in the book. The first time I ever did stand up was when I was in college in Dallas, Texas. I was
That's right.
studying acting, and they were like, the teacher had this assignment where he said we all had to do a stand up act, and it was a bunch of actor people, and they weren't funny really. So, and I had actually been funny as a kid. I had entertained the idea of being a comedian, even though I wasn't that into stand up, but I did it. I think I was like 19, and I like killed. I was great. And for my class, they weren't funny, and I was funny. Like I had some. My jokes were pretty damn good, and I did it there. Um, my teacher was like, "You're really good. You should do that." And then I went to like a couple open mics in Dallas, and I did them, and I hated them. So I was just I was just terrified, and I didn't like it, and then I came back to New York, and I was like trying to. I guess I wanted to be an actor. I'd kind of gotten that thought in my mind in high school. That school kind of drilled that into me, and I was it's a very impressionable age, and the problem was then people I went to high school with started becoming successful in the entertainment industry. So I was like, well, if they did it, like of course I'm like, well, that's how the entertainment industry works. If your friends make it, like you should make it too. And
yeah, it's like it's contagious success.
Right. And I'm like, I'm sure they can't wait to help me make it too. But then it wasn't really going well. And then I took someone was like, you should take a comedy class at Comic Strip because I wanted to do stand up. But I just, this was back in the, late 90s. It was just like, if you wanted to do something like that, it was really, you had to really do research and legwork to find how to do it. There was the internet was like barely a thing, and, you weren't, so I had to like look in the paper and find a class. And then I started it that way.
And who was do you remember the stand-up comedy class, or who taught it, or who was in the class with you?
It was me and Dane Cook and no, I'm just kidding. No, it was the guy who it was at the Comic Strip, and it was DF Sweedler. I think he's still a comedian. I feel like I definitely have seen him in the last like about 5 years ago. And I wasn't going to be like, I want someone to teach me how to do comedy. It was more at the end of it, you had to, do a showcase show.
Mm-hmm.
So that was going to force me to do it. And I remember there was maybe like 7 of us in the class, and it was just a lot of like one guy who was maybe 40 and was like, yeah, I remember he was like, yeah, I failed at everything in my life. Now I'm going to do this.
But that made an impact. That made an impact on you. You came out of there with 5 minutes of material?
Yeah, I had some material. And I did the showcase, and and I remember it went pretty well. Like it was like a bringer, and I remember I did well. But again, I don't know if you remembered your first time doing stand up or your first early times. It's it's such a weird. I can remember specific because you remember the Comic Strip had this. It was different than other clubs. They had like a door that you had to come out of to go on stage. So it made it even like scarier because it wasn't just going on stage. It was literally like you're waiting to go out onto like, it's like you're making a huge entrance into a theater. So I remember being backstage and just being like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Which I feel like I always have.
Yeah. Never goes away.
It doesn't, right? I mean, do you have? I really have stage fright. I mean, it's not crippling.
The first time I did, I remember growing up, I was a huge fan of stand-up comedy, and my dad was a fan of stand-up comedy, so he would have records, right? So he had all the old records in his record collection. He had like Steve Martin, and he had like the old Bob Newhart stuff, and I would play it, and I thought it was hilarious. And I remember at some point, I can't remember how old I was. I was like, I must have been like 11 or something like that. And there was something delivered to the house that they had delivered to our house that was for our neighbor, but they weren't home. So they were like, can they drop it off? And it was like this antique broadcast microphone because the guy worked in radio. He worked in AM radio, the guy at the neighborhood. And I remember this microphone was gorgeous, chrome, shiny microphone. And they hadn't picked it up for a couple of days. And I was just pretending to be a stand-up comic as a child, talking into this microphone, holding it. Yeah, really? I was just pretending to be like I was on stage. I just thought it was amazing. It was so, and I had it like low enough for me, but it was like this old, like the old Shure, like almost like an Elvis microphone.
Wow,
like what I have back there. I just remember playing with and pretending like everything was so hilarious. Everything I was saying in my head was hilarious.
Did you have worked out jokes yet?
No, I was just pretending to have punchlines. Like I was.
So you were
mimicking television comics because Fox. Would show Sunday nights. They would show. Was it Comic Strip Live?
Yeah, I remember that show. It was on against SNL.
Yeah,
And I
they
remember
would do
it
comic
was
strip
a
live.
quandary because it was like, I want to watch this, but now SNL's starting. Now I got to go back and forth.
So it's like, 90s stand-up comedy, early 90s stand-up comedy, and 80s stand-up comedy, huge. And then they all got sitcoms. It was all very influenced television that we were, constantly watching all this. Or do you remember the episode? I don't know if you ever watched Silver Spoons, but there was an episode of Silver Spoons, and Ricky Schroeder is going to a comedy club, and he's being kind of a jerk, and he starts heckling the comic and making some jokes, and the guy's like, "Oh, you think you're so funny? You should try getting up here." And then he ends up taking a stand-up comedy class, and he does stand-up comedy, and then someone heckles him, and then the whole thing comes full circle and was wonderful. And as a kid, I watched this, and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool."
Well, that's funny. I did watch
Stand-up
Silver
comedy.
Spoons, and I'm very well versed in pop culture, and I don't remember that episode. Was that kind of later on
I do
in
not
in
remember.
the show?
He was older. He was older. He was definitely in his older. It was the older years.
I feel like in a lot of 80s sitcoms and 90s sitcoms, there were a lot of episodes where stand-up comedy came into play, where like they would meet a comedian. I remember Facts of Life had an episode. And do you know Jeffrey Joseph, that comedian?
I don't think so.
He's a comedian who I met about 10 years ago. And so anyway, there was a Facts of Life episode where some guy just comes into the store that they own, and he's like funny. And Tootie is like, "You should be a comedian," and he's like, "Yeah." And then she sets up a showcase for like the Johnny Carson booker, and he does stand up. And then so anyway, about 9 years ago, 10 years ago, I was at a show, and Jeffrey Joseph went on, this comedian. I think he had stopped comedy and was coming back, and I was like, and I went up to him, I go, "Were you on Facts of Life?" And he like started laughing, and he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh my God, I totally remember you from the Facts of Life episode, where you were the stand-up comic or the funny guy." So yeah, they always had that. They would have just someone like 21 Jump Street had an episode where one of them wanted to be a stand-up, and
it was like a very glamorized profession.
Yeah, it was thought of as, especially like around that era. It definitely was. But it's funny. I wasn't that in, like, it wasn't. I was really into comedy young. Like I was into comedy movies, but I wasn't like the art form of stand up. What didn't like I did. I feel like you're younger than me, but like when I was young, like there was like 2 stand up specials my entire youth. It was like Eddie Murphy and then Richard Pryor, and then that was it. So I feel like I wasn't. And then when that comic strip show came on, that was kind of an interesting thing because you were exposed to a lot of new comedic. But
it was edited. It was so edited down. It was amazing. It was like the best 5 minutes of every comic across the nation at so many different clubs. Yeah, it was almost like America's Funniest Videos, but it was It was videotapes of just people in clubs, and like at lowest production quality value ever. But they were just running it on Fox once a week as like a syndicated show, and I'm just like mesmerized by it. And it's all the jokes are clean, so nothing's like edgy, but it's funny. It was it definitely, I think it brought a lot of people into the medium who were like, I could do that.
Well, definitely, yeah, definitely. And I was a kid, I was pretty young, and I remember watching it and being like, oh yeah, this is something I feel like I should be like. I was into it, but it was also, again, going back to my Gen X roots, like it was never cool. And I think it was also it was like I was a New York City kid. So like Gen X and a New York City kid, those two things, it was like, it wasn't cool to admit to liking things. Yeah. So I was always, and people would make fun of it as I got older. Like they'd mention some great movie and I'd always be like, it was all right. And they were like, what do you mean it was all right? Don't you like anything? So, I do like things a lot, but yeah, it always feels like like there's just something deep in me where like I just can't admit liking things. I feel like it makes you look weak or something, but I'm getting better at it.
I'm glad you're getting better at liking things, Tom.
Yeah.
So you're a huge Bill Murray fan. Who else were big stand-up comedy influences for you? Steve Martin's books, Born Standing Up, is fantastic. Reading about how he started doing stand-up and stuff. It's so interesting to hear how people get into stand-up, especially ones where, like, Steve Martin started his career mostly because he wanted to meet a girl, and he started doing stand-up. He didn't really have any material. He just went up there and just made a couple of dumb jokes and played like a banjo. But he just wanted to get on stage so bad. So when you started, you had a lot of, observational type stuff. Like you were kind of doing a lot of observational kind of stuff with jokes, fresh stuff, like immediately.
Um, it's funny whenever I hear about someone who's really successful, in entertainment or, not just comedy. What's interesting is I feel like there's a running theme where they're usually like, I never ever wanted to do this. I never cared. And then all of a sudden everyone was like, you're the greatest. And then I became really successful. So comedy, I feel like I was funny, and stand-up comedy, it seemed to me like nothing else was working out, and that's kind of how I ended up doing stand-up comedy. Because
That is what I've heard. I've heard you have to be bad at everything else. You can't be good at anything else and be a successful stand-up. You have to pretty much only be good at this one thing.
Well, I think it's like, to end up doing that, something has like gone wrong. It doesn't have to be like a tragic, you have the worst background or life. And it's not for everyone. Cause I mean, there's definitely comedians that like, they didn't have like, they were really into, like Seinfeld seems like someone that just loved comedy from the beginning and was
Right.
just knew what he was going to do and knew how to do it and was comfortable from the beginning. I like was funny, and people always told me it was funny. I think I was just, the idea of going on stage and just standing there and having people, I was always funny around people, and the stakes were really low. But it's really different once you get up there and you don't know the people, and they have the ability to, they have the choice of not liking you. Is always like, it's rough, especially if you are funny in life and you're used to everyone thinking you're funny, to go up there and then people are like, I don't like it. It's very like, it's hard. You're like, but everyone likes it. And that's the hardest thing about comedy, is just like figuring out how you're funny on stage. And what sucks about it is like, you have to figure it out in front of people for like years. So that's a hard thing. That's why I feel like things have to just not be going well for you to be like, well, I guess I'm just going to keep doing that. And it is like, I mean, I'm
just gonna keep falling down the stairs every night.
But you're just like, and also usually it's better if you're young and you just kind of are idealistic and you still think things can work out. And so
hope.
It's like,
you still have hope.
Yeah, you still have hope. And but it's also like, it is like that old thing that people say about the cliche, and like it is addicting. You do get addicted, especially if it goes well a little bit, because then you're just like, oh, okay, and that's the thing too about getting like stopping doing it is so hard. But I don't know, people are always like, because I stopped doing it as much, and then people are like, well, how can you not do that? I mean, you love it. And it's like, but what if I like smoked crack? Like I loved crack, it's like, you love crack. Why don't you do that anymore? It's like, well, it's not really working for me anymore. You know what I mean? I don't smoke crack, but I'm saying like, it's kind of that analogy. It's an addiction that it's not as bad as crack or something, but it can be a negative experience for you if it's going in a wrong direction. You know what I mean?
Seems like there's people who it is addictive in a I need approval so much that I need to keep on going up, and I need to keep on telling these jokes to strangers, and I need the strangers to like me. And if they don't like me, it's going to ruin me. And then I have to do it again tomorrow because I need to get these new strangers to like me.
Right. And I think what is healthy, that's good. Yeah, that's a really good comment, because it's like, I think where I did get, and I think where a lot of good comedians get, is they finally get to a place where they're not doing it for the approval, they're doing it for themselves, and they're kind of, they're not worrying as much about what the audience wants them to do. So
in your book, your character and yourself, you kind of figure it out when you stopped caring is when you started doing the best.
Right, which is such a that's when I'm at my best, and that's when I think most people are at their best. The problem is, I think I might mention it there, is that it's so hard to do that consistently, like kind of on demand. Because I mean, when you're going, there's so many things that people don't understand that go into doing stand-up. It's like trying to be relaxed in the most unrelaxing scenario. It's like trying to be relaxed and natural and light on your feet during a prison riot. It's just kind of, it's like kind of like when a car crashed, or it's like, if you're in a car crash, like, just relax. That's the safest way to be. If you're just, it's like, I'm in a car crash. Like, how am I going to fucking relax?
That's why it seems like when there's an accident with like a drunk driver, the drunk driver is usually the least injured because they are relaxed. And
Exactly.
then they don't sustain massive injuries because they don't go like this. They're not scared. They're just like, wee.
Right. Like
And then they're fine.
in the movie Due Date with Zach Galifianakis, where he falls asleep while driving and drives off the bridge, and Robert Downey Jr. gets hurt, and Zach Galifianakis is just
I
fine
did not
'cause he was
see Due
asleep.
Date, but now I need to see it. And Zach Galifianakis, he gets mentioned in this book all the time. There's a bunch of
Yeah.
people getting mentioned in this book. I really found it fun to, it was a great way to figure out what year it was, when you were kind of placing the storyline, who's new to the scene. Oh, look, it's Sarah Silverman. Oh, look, it's this new guy, Aziz. It's this new guy, this new show. They don't know what to call it. Let's call it Chappelle Show. Like all these little
Right.
things are kind of sprinkled in throughout. Here's Amy Schumer. Yeah, I met you at that show Trainwreck. Oh, what a good show name that would be.
Right.
And it's so
Or I give Dave Chappelle the idea to go to Africa to unwind.
It's great. It's fun. It's all these little hidden Easter eggs for comedy fans in the book. And there's a couple of people that, like, you disguise them. Other people you don't disguise. They're famous. And then other people you do disguise. So now I have to go and Google a bunch of people in the book because I need to figure out who they are. Because there was some alt king who's in a cult military school comedy.
Yeah. Nice.
And I need to look that up.
Any
because
clue?
I have no... Yeah, can I get a clue?
No, I can't.
Damn it.
I'll tell you later. I feel like that would be kind of the fun of it, that
So
some
now,
people would read and be like, "Who is that?"
Are you worried about people reading this book and being like, Tom, I'm not happy about this book?
Yes, I was worried about that. More as it got closer to the release of it. But like I said, I think I just assume, I feel like I've put so many things out there, and whenever I put things out there, I just assume no one is even aware of it. So
you're like, I've had this entire career in comedy. I feel like no one has seen it. So why would they read the book?
Even if people have seen things, and I feel like, because I've done things, people will contact me, but I still just don't believe anyone is aware of it. So I thought of that, and then I was like, well, if the worst problem I run into is that so many people are reading it, that they're mad, a couple of people are mad because it's become so popular, it's like, I guess I can deal with. The only thing is, I will say, like, the people whose names I really use, I don't say anything bad about them. So, and I'm not.
It's good.
All the interactions I had did happen. Like, I'm not like pretending I interacted with, John Mulaney or something. But like, these are the people that were around when I was coming up. But
yeah,
I don't say the only ones even the people I disguise, I don't say like the worst. I just say they were kind of like jerks to me. So
yeah, there's nothing in this book that is a bombshell, terrible, like this person murdered a hobo and then cut them up, and there's nothing like that.
Well, you haven't read the last part about you.
That's a good point.
So,
That's a good point.
That
could be all about me murdering a hobo in the last 30 pages. Damn it! that darn smarty, man. He's getting himself into some shit.
He's murdering all those hobos. No, so I think the only thing I was worried about is like there might be some people that were like, look, I didn't give you permission to like say that you knew me or something.
I don't think that you can get in trouble for that anymore.
I don't think so. And I said, I don't say anything bad. I just say like, and then I knew them, and then I think there's one thing I don't say, like Mike Birbiglia. I kind of talk about when I met him, and it's not really bad. It's just kind of when I met him, he was like,
he kind of power tripped a little bit.
He was just a little bit like kind of, I could tell kind of like sniffing me out. Like, who are you? Like, who is this guy? Because he was, when I kind of met him, when I first moved back to New York, like he was a real up and coming guy, and he was very established in the scene, and everyone liked it. And I think when I think when I just met him, he was a little bit like standoffish, which is just kind of how comedians are. You know how it is. Like when you're new to a scene, you're going around, it's like, it's weird. Like people are kind of like, they don't know what. I think there's a comment.
I don't think that it's bad for someone to not want to talk to you, Tom. Maybe he didn't want to talk to you, and he was standoffish. And I think you're allowed to write. This guy didn't like me because
He
I'm
didn't know me.
Tom, and I'm full of bravado, and I'm intimidating.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think I make the comment that comedians, it's like the mafia. They don't trust you until they see you kill.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Like you don't get cred until you perform, and it's amazing, and then they're like, "Oh my god, that guy's really good," and then it's like, but it's interesting how many times you get slighted in the course of the career where you do well, you meet a new person, and then that new person does really well, and then you see them a couple months later and they act like they don't even know you anymore because now they don't need you,
Right.
which
That
is
is a big.
which is a big deal. I mean, that happens in every kind of entertainment industry, but definitely actors and comedians where people use other people to get ahead in nice ways and in not nice ways. And if someone is only a user, they're not really a friend, but they act like a friend. But then once they don't need you anymore, you're kind of dead to them, and that kind
Yeah.
of seems to happen a lot in this book, on both coasts, in L.A. and New York. Little things like that do kind of happen. Uh,
Yeah. And I think it's yeah, I do talk about it. And that was something that kind of took me by surprise, which looking in retrospect, it really shouldn't. I mean, like it's sort of like a lot of the people going into that industry, it's very competitive, and they want to get to a certain place, and they're going to kind of do whatever they can. It's a fine line, because it's like if you're ambitious, you're going to be opportunistic and try and do whatever you can to get somewhere. And it's sort of like, I think I used to take it a lot more personally, like back in that time period, but looking back, like I don't really take it personally, because it's just that's sort of how people are, and that's the nature of the business. It wasn't like they were slighting me specifically. It's just
right.
that's what they were. So, and it makes sense, because it's a lot of talented, ambitious people, and that's how, I mean, no one likes to talk about that in the world, but it's like people who are successful and really ambitious, they get to where they are by a lot of times not being the nicest people.
Now,
So
what happened? This book is full of juicy stuff, Tom. Now, what happened to the female producer who tried to seduce the main character in this book, and then when she was rebuffed, suddenly the main character didn't get picked for the festival?
I think I ended up marrying her.
Did you
So
really?
no, just kidding, yeah. And fun
That's so
fact, I'm
fun.
getting my own sitcom now. So no, yeah, nothing. I feel like I haven't really.
You didn't keep in touch with any?
I
You
definitely,
kept tabs?
I didn't keep in touch, because she kind of stopped being in touch with me. But that was
Gotcha.
kind of an interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
anecdote where I did, and I do remember when that was going on. I
Have you
was kind
thought
of
to yourself, I should have just gone for it? I should have just
well, I don't
played
remember how
I should have played the game.
well, I mean, that's kind of all I think about that a lot now. I'm like, I should have played the game a lot more than I was playing the game. Well, that was more of a thing. I don't know how I kind of remember how I characterized it, but that was more like it was like it was kind of like a blurred. It wasn't so cut and dry what was happening, but I do remember it was, she was very friendly to me and seemed like she wanted to hang out in a friendly way. And then when I was around her alone, the vibe and the tone kind of shifted and felt different, and I wasn't good at navigating what was happening. So it wasn't like she was like, hey, sleep with me and I'll give you this, but she was sort of acting like
That
she
would have
might
been a
have
lot
been
more cut and dry. I think I would have
right.
been I would have been fine with that transactional
Well,
situation.
right, which maybe would have been, I might have gone for it, but it like I said, I think what happened was after that kind of odd experience, she just stopped returning my messages. And this was someone who was like kind of had approached me under the guise of like, hey, I think you're really great and you're really talented. Let's hang out. Oh, I'm really, and I was like, oh, so how come we're not friends anymore? So I don't know. I think that person just ended up being like a high up exec, and they kind of were at the
They're just
time.
running the studios now. It's fine.
Probably. I mean, but
There was a lot of
that
stuff.
story isn't as interesting as like the, Brendan Fraser story.
Which was the Brendan Fraser story? Where did I miss that?
No, not in that. I mean, like just
in reality, the Brendan Fraser.
yeah,
Yes.
where he like said
I'm like,
he
where was
sexually
the Brendan
harassed.
Fraser in this book?
The
Yes,
last 30
that is.
pages.
The last 30 pages with Smarty killing bums. There's also a big Brendan Fraser section.
Yeah.
So you went to high school with Adrian Brody. Is that correct?
Yes. Do I say his name specifically in it?
You say it later when he's up there kissing, what's her name, when he wins the
Halle
Oscar,
Berry. Yeah.
Halle Berry, and he's kissing her forcibly. Right? He's performing. He's doing this thing, and she's kind of like, okay, and then you say, "I'm looking at him, knowing that like that was the kid that we fucked with in Central Park. We made fun of in fourth grade or something like that."
Right. Right. Yeah. He and I'm sure you remember there's a part where he in high school he's playing the piano, and I go, do you know how to play the piano? And he goes, I'm pretty good, but I'm not going to win any awards for being a pianist or
It's pretty
anything.
good. Now who? Now he wasn't the guy. That's the Hollywood. That's the high school friend who you see in L.A. in the beginning of the book.
No, that's
There's
someone
a
else.
different person.
Yeah, that's in. I went to school. I went to the fame school, so I went to school with like a bunch of people who like kind of
So many people.
became famous and stuff. So
So
um,
amazing. And then the whole thing starts out as a child. You went to the Oscars when you were like 10 or 11 or something
yeah,
because you were part of a documentary film that was up for something.
I was someone. I took this when I was in sixth grade. This famous choreographer would go around to elementary schools and teach dance to kids. So, like it was like an extracurricular thing that everyone had to take part in. And if you thought you were especially talented at dance, he would pick you to be in this thing called the SWAT team. And there was like 50 to 60 of us from all these different schools, and we would go on Saturdays and take like advanced training or whatever. And it was supposed to be like this big honor. And one week he said someone made a documentary about him teaching kids dance, and it got nominated for an Oscar. And he was like, well, because it got nominated, some of the kids in the SWAT team were in the documentary. And they were like, well, they thought it'd be cool if like we were on the show. And so we danced to the song "What a Feeling" with Irene Cara. And also this is I don't so also I think I mentioned it, and I didn't realize this until about 5 years later. So like the documentary won its category for best documentary, and they were like, if it wins, you guys all go on stage with him and and accept the Oscar. So I just looked at the clip recently, and I'm to the left, but you can see me at one point. I'm just standing up there with these kids during. So I was also up there during an Oscar acceptance speech. And I looked it up later. I didn't realize the guy who won it later on directed Dirty Dancing. So I was up a few years before the guy who directed Dirty Dancing. I was up at the podium with him accepting his Oscar. And the funny part is when that happened, I had no clue what was going on. No, this is how clueless I was. Like they were like, hey, they brought us to the side of the auditorium and they were like, hey, when we say so, just run out there. And so I just ran out there. I didn't know we were up there accepting an award with the guy, so
It's amazing. And then also during the interaction that you write about, you talk to Jack Nicholson, you talk to Shirley Temple.
Yeah, Shirley. Yeah.
And what does Jack Nicholson say to you?
Well, he basically says you guys were fantastic because we danced on the show, and like it was, like in the Oscars, a lot of times they'll have sort of like a novelty thing, someone who's just kind of on the show, kind of on a peripheral thing. Like, so we were considered that for that show where we were these kids who were on the show and doing this like dance routine. And like, they were really into us. I think people thought it was cool. And then when the thing won and we were out there again, it was like another moment for us. And Jack Nicholson, I remember, was just literally right in the front row, and he won the Oscar that night for Terms of Endearment. So I remember when I was standing there for the acceptance, he was like literally like 20 feet away from me, and he had like sunglasses on. I remember like I knew who he was, but I didn't really know that much about who he was. I was like, oh, it's the guy from The Shining. And so when we were sitting on stage at the end, he was walking. They used to do a thing on the Oscars, doing it where like at the end they would have all the winners and people mingling on stage at the end. And he was walking on stage to go to mingle, and he walked up to like me and my friend. We were there, and he was like, you guys were great. And he like was holding his Oscar in his hand. And then I kind of expand a little bit in the book, which is kind of where I take some liberties where basically I suggest that he should be the Joker in Batman. So which
Superhero movies, they never catch on.
exactly. I also make the comment that Hollywood should make more superhero movies to Jack Nicholson, and he's like, no, they're not going to do that. And I'm like,
They're never
well,
going to do that. But I mean, so many people in this book that are real people that you met and have seen along the way of their careers. And then, but the Rafifi was so much fun because when you were describing the Rafifi, I was thinking to myself, and I was reading, and I was thinking to myself when I had been to Rafifi, and I was, one specific time I was on a date with a girl I had met on the Match.com. This is the very beginning of the internet dating. And she was writing an article about dating. So she matched with me and she was like, just to let you know, I'm writing an article about dating. So I'm going to write about the date, if that's okay with you. And I was like, sure, it's fine. So I went out with this girl. I take her to Rafifi for the date.
really?
Because I like going to Rafifi. I like stand-up comedy. This is like 2005, 6, something like
Okay.
that.
Right in the
So it was like right in the sweet spot because I go
right.
there and it's Bobby Tisdale hosting. It's Eugene Merman. It's Leo Allen. It's Birbiglia. It's like a party.
Yeah.
And Tisdale comes out with a big thing of like Jello shots, and it's just like everyone gets Jello shots. And I was like, okay, like it was like nuts. It was fun. It was insanely fun. So much talent was on stage. And I
Yeah, those
remember
lineups were
they're
crazy.
crazy. And I remember walking out, and Birbiglia was sitting at this bar by himself, and he just looked sad. And I was like, hold on, I want to tell him that he did really well. Because he
I
just
want to
looked
cheer
like
this guy up.
he didn't look happy. So I was like, hey, I just wanted to say like how great you were. Da, 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 da. He's like, oh man, thank you so much. It's so nice of you. And then I thought that was so fun. And then she wrote about it like in her little magazine, and it was like she called me funny fella. And we went to this place called Rafifi, and and she just described the date. And I
Oh
was like, this
wow,
is
is that like online
I've
somewhere?
looked for it and I couldn't find it, but I can't remember what the name of the thing was or wherever it went or anything. But I
Yeah,
definitely
that's
it was a wild thing to have, and then to read your account of it, was just like, wow, I was in there not realizing what like a microcosm of like this entire scene was happening right here in this place, and I just would wander in like I didn't know any. I mean, I
well,
worked
that's
in
what's weird. Yeah, that's kind of when I started writing it. I was like, as I got into it, I was like, it's really amazing thinking of like how this thing started so small, and then like what was transpiring, and just kind of down in the East Village, and people just outside of it had no idea, and like the lineups that were there, that if they were happening now would just be like these insane lineups, and people would just walk by this place not knowing like these like John Mulaney and Nick
yeah,
Kroll are doing a show with like 20 people in the audience.
yeah, it was great. It was
Yeah,
great,
so
and
it's kind of
then
an interesting.
when Eugene stopped doing, I live in Park Slope, so he was local at the time, and he started doing Beyond the Painted Veil at Union Hall, which became like the next spot for him to do that group. There was the same kind of people. It was,
Right.
and he would host that in the basement of that for a long time, and then that kind of became, and then also like the UCB with like Whiplash and all the stand up that would happen there. I love that the UCB by the under the Gristedes was absolutely just like a fun scene that it wasn't, you describe it really well in the book how much it was the anti-establishment of comedy, and it was just like this place where just hipster, cheap, poor kids in their 20s in New York City who were just comedy nerds would just hang out and watch what would become the kind of talent pool for SNL, everything that was like a Parks and Recs or The Office or any of
Right.
those shows of that type of humor ended up just being people that you saw on UCB teams, right?
Yeah.
Or people that were hot in commercials. Anybody that was doing anything that involved an actor having to do improv in the ad or the TV show came from like this farm team that was just all
Right.
just percolating there.
Yeah, and it was amazing the things that the shows that I would end up on down there that were just sort of like, what the hell am I like, what is, like, I remember I had to once I would think I was doing, I think it was Whiplash at that point, because it was Crash Test at first, and then it was, I think I was going on last, and Janine Garofalo and Jim Gaffigan were on the show, and they literally were going back to back before me, which I was like, great, all right, this should be easy. And not only did I have to follow them, but they did this thing where when one of them was out there. I think it was like Janine Garofalo was out there, Jim Gaffigan came out, and they started kind of like fake wrestling on stage. And then I was after that, and I remember I was just like, I remember I references, but I'm like, how am I supposed to follow this? Like, these are like these two comedy icons that like were heroes of mine before I even did comedy, and like I have to follow them doing stand up and doing like some kind of weird wrestling thing. So it's just kind of, and that was just like a Monday night, like so yeah, it was just it was one of those things that wasn't lost on me while it was I feel like I had moments where I was like, this is just crazy, like what that I'm here doing this.
And now that you've written it all down, and it's out there in the world, are you feeling nostalgic to go back and do more stand up? Are you doing stand up as much anymore?
I'm not doing it as much. I mean, like I've in the last couple of years, I still do it, but I don't do it. I don't really pursue it. I only really do it if someone will just ask me to do it. I don't like put myself like I'm not chasing it. And it's kind of an interesting thing because I almost feel like, doing it less. It's one of those weird things where like it's like a paradox. Doing it less, I feel like, has almost made it like me a little bit better at it because I'm not clinging to it as much. And like it's one of those things. If you're chasing something like and clinging to it too hard, the grasp of it isn't as strong. Like so, like because I've really let go of any expectation.
This brings on a good. You like to bring in the Top Gun quotes in the book a little bit. Cougar was holding on too tight. And right. Cougar had to let go. Cougar lost it. He turned in his wings.
He lost the edge.
And I don't know if people at all understand any quotes from Top Gun from the 80s, but at the very beginning of Top Gun, Cougar was the better pilot than Maverick. And he bugs out. And he almost
Cougar
crashes.
was number one. You guys were number two. Cougar lost it. He turned in his wings. You guys are number one.
You two characters are going to Top Gun.
I think it was also like Maverick was maybe the better one, but he was the Maverick. He kind of didn't play by the rules, so they didn't like him. And Cougar, he did everything right, and he was kind of the more disciplined pilot. And but it is interesting, but that is a real. I didn't even think of that because I do talk about Top Gun where he says. Because I compare stand-up to that, where like if you think up there, you're dead. Because it's like, and with stand-up, it's very like if you just get too in your head about
you lose
it.
You get up there, the smallest thing can throw you off. Someone in the crowd says something, someone sneezes, something bothers you, and you can tell. Because when I was producing the stand-up comedy, the Guaranteed Delivery shows, which you so graciously did.
Yeah, I remember that was great.
Something can turn a crowd so quickly, and you're up there, and maybe everyone's killing, and the crowd's great, and then someone goes up there, and they say something, they do something, and they lose it, and they lose this momentum, and it's gone. And you can just tell. Someone goes, I've seen people who are really good, who kill, who are so funny, and they go up there with a great crowd, big crowd, and something bothers them, the show just they tank, and then they sink harder, and then they can't get it back, and then they make it worse, and then they just leave. And then the next guy has to go in, and he has to fix it because, like, good luck.
I know it really is that is the amazing thing about stand-up. And like I talk about in the book, like the more I did it, the more I realized how hard it was. Like it's just there's so many obstacles that can get in your way, and it really is mainly just a mental game. Like it's just like if you overthink it, or it's kind of like with Cougar, like and that's it's kind of what I was saying. Like if you're hanging on too tight, like for the result of it, for like what you think it's going to get you, then. And I also feel like if you keep doing stand up and maybe you get frustrated with your act, it's like you can get stuck in what your act is. And then when I've noticed when I kind of walked away a little bit and like wasn't doing it as much, it's like different now. And I almost feel like oddly not doing it as much made me almost grow as a comedian because I was approaching it different. I wasn't the same comedian as I had been. So I felt like I had to the only way I evolved was by, it's that thing. I don't know It's
I
like almost
feel like
Buddhist.
when you're not doing it every night, it becomes less disposable and it's a little bit more precious and maybe you care about it. And people go up there and they just like sometimes they'll start and then it doesn't go perfectly in the first 5 seconds and they're like, fuck this. This crowd sucks. Fuck them. They hate me. They're the worst. And then that's their attitude, right? And then some people like nothing seems to bother them outwardly. The crowd does not affect them and they are almost insulated from it. And I feel like that's the way you kind of have to be, where you don't care. You're just up there and everything's fine. And then you just kind of, and you can tell the different types of comics or maybe just where their headspace is when they're up there. And certain people could do their act and kill to just like an empty room or two people in the audience, and their act is just as good with that two people as it is a packed room. And it's just a kind of a discipline
Yeah.
where I
Yeah.
think Sean Donnelly is someone who I feel like it can do that, or
Yeah.
like a Mark Norman, where it's just like they have it down, and it seems natural, but they're so disciplined and polished, but in a not pretentious or like overly so way. Like their personality still shines through. Like Sean is just so funny, but he could be funny anywhere, and I feel
Yeah.
like I've kind of seen him places, and you're kind of like he's always good.
Well,
Like
also,
nothing
I
seems to set him off.
yeah, I definitely also think like also when I kind of like stepped back from it, I started actually enjoying watching comedy again, and I would go back and watch the comedians I always really liked. And it's funny because it made me, I feel like I discovered like 3 years ago, I was like, wow, Norm Macdonald is really funny, which is like, I always knew he was funny, but I was watching him and I was like, oh my God. And that was from like not being around comedy. So I started watching a lot of specials of people I really like David Spade in the last 4 years became like one of my favorite comedians. Like he has a special, the Take the Hit, that I watch all the time, and it's a good example of he's not like killing the entire time, but he's hilarious the
Yeah.
entire time. So there is a weird thing I realized of like everyone gets obsessed with killing, and I killed and I got this many laughs, and it's like I started realizing like the people I think are the funniest aren't really that concerned with killing. They're just always exactly there's a thing like you'll watch a comedian and maybe they're not getting huge laughs the whole time, but they are killing. Like the crowd
Yeah.
loves them. So I started realizing like even if I'm not getting the laughs I think I should be getting, I still think they can think I'm really funny. And also like as long as I'm being entertained, I got more into that. Like where I would like record myself and I'd be like, wow, that's really funny. Like I think and I start being like, I can listen to myself and think it's funny. And I was thinking like, I almost guarantee you the best comedians in the world, like Dave Chappelle or Chris Rock or Louis C.K., I guarantee they can listen to their acts and be like, this is funny. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they can. I mean, but also in the what you said about how it's not about the jokes killing though, it's about them just being themselves, like them being this whole character, this whole person on stage. It's not about going up and just having joke, 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 and each thing is an individual thing that people can be amused by. They're being amused by the entire persona that person is being on stage, and they're being it so confidently
Right.
that it's like the audience at that point is eating out of their hand, and they could say anything and the audience would laugh because they are rooting for you at that point. Like if you get the crowd on your side and they like you as a person and what you're bringing, like if David Spade's being very David Spadey, just a look, he could just kind of give a look and everyone laughs, right? So like that's the kind of thing that when people can master that, it's just kind of like wow, they've really
Right.
cracked it, because like they don't have to tell a setup and a punchline anymore. They can just kind of say a comment or a thing or make a gesture and everyone's like roaring and you're kind of like, that's incredible, that's amazing, like that's
And
the
even their
magic.
missteps will be
Right.
funny. Even when they're not being funny or like they say somebody doesn't do that well, it's still funny. It's like a weird but I got more and it's weird. Because I stepped away from it and I started watching it again, I felt like I became like a student of comedy. Because like you're doing comedy a long time, you kind of feel like, oh, I got to figure it out. I don't need to really do any more research. But I approached it more as like a fan again and was like, oh, like this and the fact that I would just get into Norm Macdonald and David Spade in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, I always thought they were funny, but I mean, like David Spade now I will think is like maybe the most underrated stand-up out there, just because he's really successful, but I don't think people think of him as a great stand-up. But I just watched his last special and I thought it was like, I feel like he's one of the most like, his persona is so fleshed out and great that
He's so
just
consistent, he's so
yeah.
consistent. Yeah.
And it's like, even if a joke isn't that great, which they usually are, like, it's just, he's so funny. You know what I mean? It took me a long time to realize that a lot of comedians, it's not really their material. It's just, they have such a unique take on things.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
And you believe them. You believe that that's him, like some people, they play a character on stage so much that you're kind of like, no, I don't believe that. Like, I don't believe that happened to you. I don't believe that you said that to that person. And a lot of comedy, you're obviously not actually happening in your real life, but you have to believe that happened to them in real life. Yeah. And if you don't bring that to the table, if you're not making them think that did happen to you at the grocery store or on the subway, then it's not going to work. Like
right.
People, they can't always be talking about my girlfriend, blah blah blah, and it's like, dude, you don't have a girlfriend.
Yeah,
there's no way this guy's getting laid. Like sometimes people go up there and they have a setup that's not true, and you can tell right away. Yeah, maybe they do have a girlfriend. I'm just being horrible, and that's true. I can be horrible too.
He's going back to the Gen X thing. I feel like David Spade is a very Gen X-ish persona because he came up in the 90s when Gen X was kind of first becoming like a term that people were talking, and he just encapsulated the very like aloof, detached, kind of like snarky, like I don't care what everyone's so stupid, like that kind of everything. But I think
the Hollywood Minute. The Hollywood Minute.
Oh
with
yeah,
David
exactly.
Spade.
Like that. I mean, it's that right there is like, it's almost like that's when he really tapped into what his voice was. But I think what saves him is he could come off as like maybe a total prick, but he's very self-deprecating too. Like he's almost like what the Pete Davidson before Pete Davidson, because he was known for just being single, and like just all these hot women were like super into him. And
yeah, he always does well. He's always doing well. He's not like the leading man that you think, but he has the personality. It gives hope to a lot of people. He's
one of those guys. He just is like, him just talking is funny. And Norm Macdonald was to say, Norm Macdonald like had a thing where it was like, he just talked in funny. You know what I mean? Like anything he said is his interviews are more entertaining than his stand-up.
He's great. Norm was so funny. I mean, his stand-up was great. His Weekend Update was amazing. So influential in so many people on delivery and just like the way that he would turn. He had such a turn in his jokes.
Oh yeah, and the turn was always exactly the thing. Like there was no like misdirect. It was the exact.
It was the blunt thing we were all thinking. He just said it, and it was so good.
And he would go on Conan a lot and like do a bit, and it would bomb, and he would just be like, I thought that was gonna be funny, and it would be funny how it, or he would just be in the middle of a story and would just kind of end the story in the middle of nowhere and just be like,
So where do you see this now? So this is going to go. It's going to become a huge bestseller, and then adapted to. It's going to be a screen. It's going to be a comedy movie or a TV show. And who's going to get stuck playing you? Are you going to play yourself in this?
I'm assuming Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah,
probably.
I think a Timothy. Yeah, I could see it. I could definitely see it.
He went to the Fame High School too, so
Well, there you go. You guys see each other at the alumni events.
Yeah, of course.
You could slip him a copy of the book, and he will be.
I'll just look him up on the directory that they send out to everybody. No, I mean, actually, when I first had thought of it, I was like, I feel this could be like a series of some type, because they made a. What was it? It was called I'm Dying Up Here. Well, Crashing too.
I'm Dying Up Here is one of my favorite shows. Definitely about stand-up comedy, but such a good show, right? Such a dramatic but fun show about stand-up comedy, and so it's the most authentic stand-up comedy show that there's been. Like, it's so dramatic, but it's so accurate.
And also, it was cool because it was for that specific era. That was a very impactful era.
That
of
era
comedy.
was great.
And it was similar because they had main characters in it who were maybe playing an amalgamation of people who were there, but they weren't. The main people weren't the actual people.
Yeah.
But they were on the periphery. Were all the people that like Richard Pryor and all the celebrities. So
Great.
that's kind of when I was writing it. That was kind of part of the pitch when I was trying to get it published. Was like. It's kind of like the I'm Dying Up Here, but for the aughts alternative comedy scene. So, yeah, I mean, that's a thing I was thinking of. All I need now is to, get some huge Netflix execs to get behind it. But it's funny because Pete Holmes kind of his I mean, he doesn't, it's not about the alt scene. It's just kind of about when he was doing comedy, but he does have, I think, an episode where he goes to Rafifi to do stand up. So, they're obviously, and like Mulaney is in the episode and Bobby Tisdale, so it's kind of an interesting crossover. But I was like, I'm going to focus just primarily on that, and also
Tom, you were not in that episode, Tom.
I know. Well, I think I just, believe me, that was not lost on me when I saw the episode.
What? What is going on here? You're getting dissed
again. I think it was between me and Mulaney, and he went with Mulaney,
Such a popularity
just like
contest.
the story of my life between me and Mulaney gets it.
God, so unfair. So people need to get this book. I'm not going to take up your entire day, but I will tell people they have to go pick up the book. It's Born Funny. I'm going to read the last 30 pages, and I'm going to be very angry all of a sudden, but I haven't gotten there yet, so I haven't seen the part about me. Follow Tom on Twitter at Tom McCaffrey, and listen to Tom's podcast, Last Exit to Brooklyn. How is that going?
And it's good. You were going to be on it at one point, but
yeah, like 6 years ago. 6 years ago, you invited me to be on it, and I was like, yeah, I'll get back to you, and then we never did it. But we can.
Well, I think you were scheduled, and then you had to cancel. But then this was before the pandemic, where now you can just do it like this. Because it's funny, when I was about to do, and I was getting ready to do this, I was like, oh wait, how am I going to get there again? Wait, and then you were like, here's the link, and I was like, oh yeah, that's how it is now. You can just do it.
We don't have to leave our homes, isn't that?
So you
great?
can. So I mean, yeah, you should. I mean, if you want to come on, we can do it. It's easier. It'll be harder for you to get out of this time because
it will be.
You do it this way, so
I can be on it literally anytime now.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, well, I'll hit you up about that.
And you've been doing. How long has the Last Exit to Brooklyn podcast been on, Tom?
I think it's been like 8 years. I had kind of a time. First of all, I went to law school about 7 years ago, so I was doing it during that, but I think took about 7 or 8 months off because I was so busy. But things have changed so much because like when I first started it, like no one in New York City and like in comedy had a podcast. It was more like an LA comedy thing, and so it was kind of a anomaly, I guess, to have one. But now just everyone has one, and it's like not even comedy, everyone in the world. So it's just kind of
another trend that you started.
Yeah, I know. But I think I talked about it on that because I started around the time Ari Shaffir started. I remember when he was first talking about like having a podcast, and I was like, what's that? He was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, Joe Rogan. I'm doing this thing with Joe Rogan. I'm like, what? So I don't know whatever happened with that.
It'll never take off, that Joe Rogan podcast. No one's going to listen to that junk.
Yeah. So,
Well,
yeah, check out my podcast.
Check out the podcast, Last Exit to Brooklyn. Check out the book, Born Funny. Tom McCaffrey, at Tom McCaffrey on Twitter. Thanks so much for being on the show, Tom. This has been wonderful catching up with you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. And I'll hit you up about doing our pod.
You will.
I appreciate
we will definitely do it.
Okay. Cool.
Thanks for being on. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.